It's not just the answers, not just the quotes. It's life in the margins. It's time for CluffsNotes.
The shift.
So if you look at my sketchbook that's there and you glance through it, you will find some bright and colorful images. But you're also going to see some pages that only have pencil scribblings. There's no ink, there's no color, there's words, there's lists, there's shapes, there's bubbles, because that's how it starts. That kind of page is what it looks like when I'm trying to visually wrestle with something. So when a new idea or question comes to my mind and I know I need to process and think about it for a while, my preference is to actually include sketching as a way to explore it. And just like that pencil-filled page, I try to first get everything out. It's very scattered. I usually will say, I'm trying to get the swirl out of my head. It starts lightly, there's pencil, loose lines, clustered words, phrases, nothing really formed, nothing connected. Simply getting it out so that I can start looking for patterns. But as time passes and as that swirl keeps working in my head, I start to find connections. Images begin to replace my words. Lines will darken with ink. Commitments are made. And I love that unnecessary pencil noise just slowly gets erased. And I add color and it starts defining the patterns even more. And eventually, and honestly, sometimes it can be weeks, I will finalize the sketch with very clear, stark borders. And usually that's when I close the book because I feel done. I feel grounded. I actually feel thankful because I can literally see my thinking a little more clearly.
Enter AI.
Artificial intelligence entered my reflective world in a way kind of similar to how I sketch. There was not a moment where everything clicked. There was no sudden realization. There was no clean turning point. It was a lot like my pencil swirling before any of the darker lines start to form. And my interest actually started a few years ago when I watched this TED Talk by one of my educational heroes, Sal Khan. Because even before COVID, we were already using the Khan Academy as a free resource to support students in our schools. But in this talk, he was describing how AI might actually support education, not destroy it. And what struck me wasn't the technology, it was his perspective. He wasn't talking about AI as something to fear. He was inviting us to consider how it might actually enhance what we're trying to do. And that just caught me off guard. Because up to that point, most of what I heard about AI, especially in education, it lived in this very different space. Misuse, shortcuts, cheating. It was the same kind of concerns we had with cell phones in the schools. But this felt different. He was helping me start to see it from this different angle. It didn't feel like a replacement. It felt like something that could possibly increase the impact of our work. And that was enough for me to realize that I didn't want to just be curious. I wanted to start digging deeper. So I decided not to wait because I wanted to be a pioneer, not a settler.
Pioneers.
I had learned years ago that in time of change, there are people who are pioneers, those who step forward early, and there are settlers, those who wait and ask, is it safe, before they move. And I'd also learned that one of the best ways for pioneers to understand change was to widen their perspective about it. So in the realm of AI, with all my very limited knowledge, I started learning by making it a very planned, reflective focus for me. And I approached exploring AI with the same kind of childlike curiosity that I see in Jasper and in Harbor, my grandkids. And using the additional advice I heard about shifting paradigms, I made sure I started to explore AI outside of education. Because no offense to my public education peeps, But we all know change and innovation will move at a very slow pace in those systems. So I intentionally looked at what was happening in other spaces: business, leadership, medicine, research, TED Talks, documentaries, YouTubes, podcasts. I paid attention to what was happening in real time. I had so many conversations with clients and friends and even random people when I was traveling. And I would ask, where was AI showing up in their world? And at first, as expected, I think my understanding was pretty surface. I often was wowed by its novelty and potential. It was enhancing emails or summarizing articles, organizing information, the usual stuff. But I tried to stay grounded beyond the hype. My desire was to try to consider the future implications of this impact, specifically in areas like education and leadership. And what I've been learning has dramatically impacted my view of the future. But what stayed with me in this learning journey was something I didn't expect.
Transcripts.
Alongside all of this exploration, I was doing what I've always done, trying to make sense of things, stepping into reflection. For me, a lot of times that meant recording voice memos as an easy way for my brain to get engaged in the processing of something. So I was doing that in this exploration too. I was talking through what I was learning, my questions, discoveries, insights, and connections. And somewhere along the way, I entered a higher level in my processing. The speed of innovation had made technology so much better in converting the human voice into text, right? We were speaking into text boxes, using car navigation systems, the home smart devices. More technology was including this use of speaking as a means to interact. And suddenly, those recordings, those long, rambling, one-way focused recordings became transcripts. And the transcripts immediately put me into a conversation about what I was processing. So now, instead of simply recording my thinking as a voice memo, I could interact with it. And in doing so, AI could do what it does best: hold big chunks of information, filter through the noise, help highlight those connections. And I could respond, ask questions, I could start to explore patterns, almost like the benefit I get in sitting with someone like you here on the patio. My voice engages me, not the typing. And that changed something for me because I was no longer stuck by trying to wordsmith my thoughts, trying to say it right or learn this AI language in order to interact with it. I just would simply talk. I could trust that it would make sense of the noise. Then I would copy, paste, and instantly I was engaged in my own thinking. Honestly, it was a little crazy, and it was incredibly helpful.
Cassettes.
It actually reminded me of something from years ago. Way back in the late 1980s, when I was becoming a teacher, I would work off and on at this law firm in downtown Tampa. And one odd thing I remember vividly was all the attorneys used these small, handheld, micro cassette recorders. They would record on these tiny little cassettes. They're about the size of a matchbox. They would dictate letters, leave updates, share reflections, and those tapes would go out to the assistants and the paralegals in the firm. And I would watch people sit down, put on their headphones, grab a piece of paper and pencil, and then listen. And I also remember this one attorney, Nick. He did something a little more. Instead of just giving quick, precise instructions, he would talk things through. He would reflect, explain his thinking, share the context, ask questions. And he wasn't just giving information. He was actually creating a partnership with whoever listened to it. And looking back, I realized he was using his natural voice to build something very dynamic and trusting. And in a lot of ways, that's what my voice memos started to feel like. The voice memos became like those little cassettes. It was a way to get my thinking out of my head. But now, instead of waiting like Nick had to do, I could immediately get engaged with that thinking. I wasn't simply recording my thinking anymore. I was interacting with it. And because I could open different conversations for different ideas, I found that I could actually come back to something later and pick up right where I left off. It was wild. I am thankful for the variety of teams that I've been able to be on in my life. I especially love those where we did not have to reset every time we meet. We could simply pick up where we left off and keep building, extending ideas, seeing something new. And I guess that's what that was starting to feel like. Let me pause here and for a second and be very clear. Just like when I work with people, AI is far from perfect. When I'm talking with someone, whether it's a colleague, a neighbor, family, or even with you here in the patio, I'm only looking to enhance my thinking. I'm not looking for anyone to give me answers. I'm very aware that all of our perceptions are limited, and sometimes they can even be blind. So I intentionally approached the AI the same way. I trained it by saying, I don't want you to be one of those know-it-all friends who constantly suggest corrections or enhancements, overstepping what I need and trying to drive engagement. Instead, I told it, I want you to be like the smart, chill, stoner-like friend sitting on the patio, interacting with me to simply help me think, not try to solve everything. Help me broaden my limited viewpoint.
Perspective.
And when I think back to some of the more challenging moments in my life, like standing behind that campus, looking at that fire, what I needed again was not certainty. It was perspective. A moment to step back, to make sure I was not so close to the trees that I couldn't see the forest. And that's why we ran around that campus for a few minutes, calibrating with others the impact of that brush fire. I was so fortunate to have just a little time to be able to add those insights before I had to decide anything. That's why I love working on healthy teams. When the right people are around, when there's time, when the conditions allow it, my thinking is always broader, deeper, and richer. And on the most effective teams I've ever been a part of, hashtag CP400, hashtag Green Team, perfection was never our goal. Since clarity was never handed to us, we had to build it. We spent time together, away from the noise. We slowed our thinking down. We worked through it together. Our success came from not having to think alone. And what I started to realize was, in my voice memo journey, I could supplement my need to not think alone when people weren't available. I could bring in another perspective about things that I was processing. And that was the shift.
Another reel for the shelf.